guys, welcome back to Commander Tax. I'm Adam, and this is the Commander Die. This is our second episode. This episode is featuring Camellia the Seedmiser. She is 1, a black and a green pip. She's a legendary squirrel warlock that reads Menace. Other squirrels you control have Menace. Whenever you sacrifice one or more foods, create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. You can pay 2 and forage. Put a 1/1 counter on each other squirrel you control. What is forage? Well, forage is a new mechanic that reads exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. So this is going to be a squirrel and a food deck. So there's going to be plenty of food to forage so we don't have to exile our graveyard, and so we can do kind of a recursion theme as well. Alright, so let's look at the first category here. Our first category today, early drops. So what are our early drops? The first one is Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender. Only 2 generic mana, and he reads, Sir Ginger the Meal Ender has trample, hexproof, and haste as long as an opponent controls a planeswalker. This does come into play occasionally, but the important part is whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on Sir Ginger and scry 1. So food are artifact tokens, and being that they're tokens, they do disappear once they hit the graveyard, but they still hit the graveyard. So every time you sack a food, he's going to get a 1/1, and he's going to be able to scry 1. So he's a great early drop because you get him on the field, and then over time with your food, you're going to build him up and make him really big. His other thing is you can pay 2, and then you can sack him, and you gain life equal to its power. Since he is a food knight, he's got the food. Yeah, you get it. All right, moving on. So our next card is Teething Wormlet. It's 1 green pip, and it's a worm, and it says it has Death Touch as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. So that means 3 or more foods, or artifacts of a different kind. You could have Soul Ring and 2 foods, whatever. But whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn, put a 1/1 counter on Teething Wormlet. So this is a great card because early on it's just a 1/1, but then as you play the game, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the thing is, your opponents do not want to play a premium removal on a 1 mana cost creature. So that's what makes this good, is that even at 1 mana, it's a big threat. Next up, we have Chitter Spitter. Chitter Spitter is 2 and a green. It's an artifact, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice a token. So most likely a squirrel or a food. If you do, put an acorn counter on Chitter Spitter. Squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each acorn counter on Chitter Spitter. You can also pay 1 and tap this, and you're going to create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. This is a great card. This is OP, and it just gets reprinted here. It looks like in Bloomburrow. Same art as what it was originally printed as, and just a good card. Next up, we have a Mana Rock, a new one from Bloomburrow, Patchwork Banner, and when it enters, you choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1, and then you can tap it and add a mana of any color. So this is a great 3-cost Mana Rock because it also works as an Anthem. And I would use this over a lot of other, even 2-cost Mana Rocks just because of that Anthem effect that you get. All right, that's it for that category. Let's move on to our next category. So our next category is tokens and counters. Let's take a look. So you're going to get a bunch of squirrels with Camellia, but we need a way to pump them up. She's going to pump them up herself, but we want to add on to that fact because going wide is nice, but going tall is going to be even nicer. So our first card here is Mazarek Crawl Death Priest, a great commander on its own. However, this is going in the 99, and it reads for 3 and a black-green pip, flying whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, so that includes food, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So yeah, all of our squirrels, as we go wide, they're going to get even bigger. Camellia is going to make them bigger. This is going to make it bigger. The more of these kinds of cards that we can put in here, the better. Next up is Deep Forest Hermit. So this is a token card, and it has Vanishing 3, but when it enters, you create 4 green squirrel creature tokens. Squirrels, you get +1/+1. So basically, it's a static effect. They get your squirrels even bigger, and when this comes in, you're getting 4 squirrels. So worth it. I'm not putting a lot of squirrel token generators in this deck because Camellia is going to create a lot of squirrels when you sack foods. But having this one because it creates 4 is really good too. What do we got next? So next up, we got Rapacious Guest, a Lord of the Rings card that's 2 in a black pip. It's a halfling citizen that reads Menace. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a food token. Whenever you sacrifice a food, put a 1/1 counter on Rapacious Guest. When Rapacious Guest leaves the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to its power. So this is just a good creature that when you deal combat, you're creating a food, so you're getting that token, and then she's going to get bigger over time. So kind of like our Wormlet at the beginning that we talked about, this is just a threat on the board, and then when no one wants to remove her, so as she gets bigger, she's more of a threat, so people want to remove her. Well, when they remove her, opponent is going to lose life equal to the number of counters, or actually no, it's not the number of counters, it's the power, so it's even better. So you're going to add 2 plus whatever counters you have. So great card. Next up, we have another Lord of the Rings card. This one's Pippin, Ward of Isengard. It's just a black and a green pip. Halfling Advisor. It does have a partner, but we're going to ignore that. And you can pay 1, you tap him, and you get to create a food token. You can sacrifice 4 foods, and other creatures you control get +3/+3, and gain haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. I don't know how often we're going to be sacking 4 foods at once, but we have plenty of cards that say when you sack a food. A great example is our Rapacious Guest, that you get a +1/+1. So if we sack 4 foods, she's going to get +4/+4. But in this case, then they're going to get an additional 3, so she gets +4, and then she gets another 3. Same thing with Wormlet. Like, although it's just going to get 1 for the first food, it's going to get the +3. Like, it's really a great card to have in this deck. Also, our squirrels, of course, are going wide. Yep. All right, I want to talk about another interesting card. It's something different that I don't think a lot of people have talked about. It's Agent Frank Horrigan from the Fallout set. He's 5, a black, and a green pip. Granted, he is very expensive, so probably why people haven't talked about him. But in a commander game, you can get to 7, a casual commander game, and I think it's worth playing, especially in this deck. So he is a mutant warrior, and it reads Trample. Agent Frank Horrigan has indestructible as long as it's attacked this turn. Whenever Agent Frank Horrigan enters the battle or attacks, proliferate twice. So proliferate means increase the counters on all of your permanents by 1. So if you get to do it twice, you get to increase it by 2. So if you have 3+1/+1 counters on it, you're going to get now 5. So it's going to be +5/+5. Great card. He's an 8/6. He's a big body all by himself, and I think he's great in this deck. All right, so that's it for the counters and tokens category. Let's move on to our next one, which is Bargain. Bargain was a new mechanic in Wild's Veil Drain, and so I have a few of those cards, and I have cards that resemble Bargain, right? Not quite the same thing, but very close. So the first one like that is Bristlebud Farmer. This one is from Thunder Junction. He's 2 and 2 green pips. He's a plant druid that has trample, and when he enters, you create 2 foods. Whenever Bristlebud Farmer attacks, you may sack a food. If you do, you mill 3 cards, and you may put a permanent card from among them into your hand. This is a way to return a card that you then milled back to your hand. So it's a way to mill yourself, but also make sure that you're not pitching anything that you don't want. And it allows us to sack a food. Next up, we have Back for Seconds. This is a 2 and a black pip. It's a sorcery that reads Bargain. You may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you cast this spell. We're going to be doing an artifact. It's going to be a food. So when you cast this, you sack a food, and then you return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. If this spell was bargained, you may put one of those cards with mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your hand. This is a great value. So for 3 mana and sacking a food, which we want to do anyways, you get 2 things back from your graveyard, and then you get to put one of them, granted it has to be less than 4 mana, but we have tons of those cards in this deck. You get to put it right onto the battlefield. Great little recursion piece. Next up, we have Beseech the Mirror. This is probably the most popular bargain card. It's 1 and 3 black pips. We're only in 2 colors, so we should be able to do that. It reads Bargain. Search your library for a card, exile it face down, then shuffle. If this spell was bargained, you may cast the exile card without paying its mana cost. This spell's mana value is 4 or less, so the 4 or less thing again. Put the exile card into your hand if it wasn't cast this way. So you can get something like Agent Frank Horrigan and just take them to your hand, or you can get like the Chitter Spitter and you can play it out onto the battlefield for free with this card. It's a great retutor ability and one that I think works great in this deck. Next up, we have Lynch Knight's Conquest. It's 4 and a black pip. This is another recursion piece. This one's a sorcery. It says sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens. We're going to have lots of artifacts, lots of tokens. You can return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if we have a bunch of stuff in our graveyard, but we have a bunch of tokens that we've created, we can sack, 3 food and 2 squirrels, and we can bring 5 things back to our battlefield. It's a great card. It works really well in this deck, and it's a fun one that I've been wanting to put in a lot of decks, so I'm glad that it fits in here, and it's going to work really well for us. All right, that's it for that category. Let's move on to our last one, and it is finishers. So our finishers are 1, Displaced Dinosaurs. It's 5 and 2 green pips, and it reads, as historic permanents enter the battlefield under your control, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature in addition to its other types. So what is this? So every time we create a food, it is now a dinosaur chicken nugget, right? It is a 7/7 food that we can then swing with and win the game. So if we can create a bunch of food all at once, we're going to have an army of dinosaurs that we can swing in, especially if we can give them haste somehow. So probably a haste enabler here would be great too, and win the game. All right. Next up, we have God Eternal Ronus. So if you're spending all this time creating this really wide board of squirrels, and let's say you got a bunch of counters on them, when God Eternal Ronus, who's 3 and 2 green pip, enters, he's a zombie god with death touch, and when he enters the battlefield, you double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. When it dies, you put it into exile from the battlefield. You may put it into the owner's library, 3rd from the top. So basically, if you have, let's say, 7 squirrels, right, then they're all 3/3s. Well, they're all 6/6s. So it's kind of like that overrun effect. Granted, they don't have trample, so you could actually add overrun in here as another finisher. Probably a good card now that I'm thinking about it. But this is going to be great too, especially if you have some other form of evasion. If you give a menace, for instance, and this can just win you the game. So great card. So our last finisher is Feasting Hobbit. He's 1 in a green pip, and he reads, Devour Food 3. Creatures with power less than Feasting Hobbit's power can't block it. So what is Devour? Devour is, as this creature enters, you may sacrifice any number of foods. This creature enters the battlefield with 3 times that many counters on it. So a Devour 3, if you devour 1 food, you're going to get 3 counters. So if you have a whole bunch of food on the battlefield, let's say you have 5 food, you're going to get 15 counters on this. So it'd be a 17/17, and nothing with less than 17 power would be able to block it. So if somebody doesn't have a removal, this is just going to win the game. And that's it. Those are all the cards that we're talking about for this commander deck. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Oh, like and subscribe. Hey guys, just one more thing to note. If you saw this in the background, this is my new variant for Zatanna, Bring Down the House, number 2. So if you love comic books like I do, I have another channel called Carnage Comics. Go out there. I'll put a link in the description, and you can check out that other channel.